he is an innovator in enterprise risk management solutions. And he's also the Chief Executive Officer of Archer Technologies. So please welcome Jon Darbyshire.
Well, welcome to the 5th Annual Archer User Group Summit. This is the time of the year for our company that's most exciting because we get the opportunity to spend 2.5 to 3 days with our customers and to talk about what's most important to you. And that allows us to then begin to build the Archer product roadmap for the next year. And today we're going to spend a little time to talk about what we've learned over the last couple of years as we've been in these sessions, the types of enhancements and feature requests that you've asked for, and then how we've been able to deliver those back to you. And before we get started, each year, what I'd like to do is spend just a couple of minutes for the new people that are in the room here to talk about who is Archer, what are the products that we have to offer, how did we get to where we're at today, why do we have all of these great companies in the room today to talk about risk and compliance efforts. So we'll spend just a few minutes to do that, and then we're going to talk about some pretty innovative things that we're trying to do as a company based on ideas that you've had. We've had some initial ideas, you've helped us enhance those. At other times, you've had the ideas that have led to some things we're going to show you in the Archer Exchange today. So to kick things off, we're going to get started with who is Archer Technologies? And we're a company that's been around since about 2001. Our very first customer was EDS, and in fact, we probably have a couple of representatives from EDS here today. I think Leslie and Charlotte, are you in the room? It's kind of hard to see, yeah. And without Leslie and Charlotte, we wouldn't be here today. We approached EDS with an idea back in October of 2000 to build a product very similar to what we have today. It was the first generation of that product. And I remember getting on a plane and going to EDS and meeting with Charlotte and in a big conference room with about 20 people talking about this great vision, and they wanted to see the product, and I had this little 3.5-inch diskette, and I put that diskette in, and it had this HTML, and it showed this great vision, and Charlotte said, "That looks great. How soon can you have that implemented?" I'm like, "We haven't even written a line of code yet. We didn't even have a developer at that time. In fact, we were running Archer out of our house. I was working at the kitchen table, or I was working in my office, my mom was at the kitchen table, and then Tara was working downstairs. And because of EDS and their investment back in Archer, that's what got us started as a company. And over the next 18 months, we worked with 2 to 3 additional companies. Credit Suisse First Boston was when we got the chance to meet John Kirkwood. We worked with Wells Fargo and Lehman Brothers. And what we tried to do during that time was to understand how companies would use a product like this inside of their organization to manage risk and compliance needs. And the very first thing that we focused on were 4 key business processes that we felt need to be solved at that time to implement a best-in-class enterprise risk and compliance program. In fact, at that time, it was called Enterprise Security Management. We didn't even have this word risk and compliance just yet. So the very first product, and what we feel is the foundation of our solution set, is policy management. And that gives you the ability to track the authoritative sources that govern your organization, those industry standards, those federal and state regulations, those internal mandates that you have that tell you how you need to act as a company. And then it allows you to map those back to the policies that you have in the company to ensure that you're in compliance from a policy perspective. It then gives you the ability to communicate those policies out to your employees, right? It doesn't sound like a pretty big deal, but we have companies in the room today that are in over 100 different countries with regulations in each of those 100 companies or countries. So when you start talking about the volume of the problem, you're really talking about a knowledge management system. So that was the first piece that we began to work with EDS to understand, is how to pull all that information together and to report it back not to hundreds of people, but to hundreds of thousands of people that need to have access to that information. Our second core product was threat management. And threat management allows you to take a live data feed from one of the industry-leading providers like a Cisco, a Symantec, a VeriSign, to bring that content into your instance of Archer at your location. And you can set that feed up to come in every couple of minutes or every day or every week from those providers. And then once that data is inside your company, you can do your own analysis to decide how you want to follow up with that vulnerability, right? And it goes quite a bit farther than that, but that's just a very brief explanation of the threat piece. It's helping you understand the threat landscape that affects the systems that you have in your organization. The third solution that we worked with EDS on is asset management. And this was really just the ability to categorize the assets that you have inside of your organization, starting with, at the top of the list, products and services. So knowing as a company what products and services do we offer to the market, then mapping that back to the business processes that you have in place that support those processes, the applications that support those business processes, the devices that support the applications, the facilities that they're located in, and the individuals that are responsible for those. And you need that information because to pull everything together to know what to go do, you need to know what you need to protect and at what level you need to protect it, right? So not rocket science, but it's a knowledge management problem still at that point. So we worked with those 3 or 4 companies for about 18 months on those 3 core solutions to try to understand not just the content that needed to be collected, but the user interfaces and how to communicate that information back to different levels of people in your organization. And that's where some of the charting and the dashboards that you see that we have today, the early versions of those came from those initial discussions with those end users. The 4th solution that we brought to market, we worked primarily with Goldman Sachs, was the leader in that initially. And they needed the ability to do applications assessments against over 2,000 applications that they had in their organization. They needed to do it very, very quickly, and they needed to be able to relate those applications back to the policies and the controls that needed to be implemented on those particular applications. So that was generation 1 of our risk management product. It was pretty rudimentary compared to what we have today, but it solved a very specific issue that we were trying to take care of then. So those 4 solutions happened in version 1 and 1.5 of our product over the first 2 to 2.5 years. And then in our user group meeting back in, I think, 2003, 2004, the hot topic that year was incident management. In fact, we had a couple of companies that had begun to use our product to build out their own incident management solution, came to the conference, was telling everybody about it, and that was the hottest selling solution that we had as a company for about a year to 18 months. It seemed like it was just a wave that went through the industry that all of a sudden everybody was focused on incident management. But that was the first time that we really got together as a group to understand what your requirements were, where you were heading, and it allowed us to get out in front to help build a product to support those needs. The next year that we got together, there was this word called vendor management that started popping up, something completely new to Archer. We didn't have any expertise in vendor management at that time, and it was all about managing relationships that you have with third parties and tracking those relationships that you have to understand what level of product or service they provide your organization, and understanding do they have company data that you've outsourced that are on servers that they're protecting? Is there credit card information? Is there customer information that's there? And if there is, there's some level of risk assessment that needs to be completed against that vendor from a compliance perspective before that vendor can continue to act on your behalf. So the vendor solution is all about managing third-party relationships, and we work with a couple of companies that are in this room with that first product. In the early days, there was 10,000 plus vendor relationships trying to be managed at one of the companies that we worked with, and that became the genesis of the vendor solution that we now have that many of you in this room use today. The last solution that we have that rounds out this suite of 7 solutions is around SOX compliance. And I have to say, when people ask, how'd you get into the SOX business, I said, kicking and screaming, because I didn't know anything about SOX, and a lot of us that are in this room didn't know much about SOX 3 years ago either. We just knew it was something that you needed to do. It was a very painful exercise from a risk and compliance perspective. You were responsible for pieces of it, but not the whole process. Typically, the product was owned by someone on the finance side. And we had a couple of customers, the first of which was Washington Post, that came to Archer and said, we don't want any of the solutions that you have to offer, but this thing that you call the Archer SmartSuite Framework that I'm going to talk about in just a minute, that seems pretty cool, and we'd like to model out our own SOX process. And we want to do that to manage relationships with the 13 companies that make up the Washington Post. And it was the first enterprise deployment of a product of that nature inside of the Washington Post that goes across all 13 products.